Oke, mungkin bisa dimulai, Mas Andre.
Okay, Michelle, you are still mute. Please unmute to speak up, please.
Siap, Pak. Oke. Maaf sebelumnya, selamat siang, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Selamat datang dalam webinar bersama Fakultas Pertanian dan Bisnis Universitas Kristen Satya Wacana. Selamat datang teman-teman yang ada dalam Zoom dan juga yang ada di dalam YouTube ya, streaming YouTube mungkin teman-teman. Dengan hari ini kita akan melaksanakan webinar dengan topik Agroecology as a means to reduce water pollution, increase nutrient use efficiency and improve human health and happiness. Salam hangat dan selamat datang. Dengan spesial kami ucapkan kepada Mr. John Miller, kemudian kepada Ibu Dina Banjarnahon dan juga kepada teman-teman dari SMK Kristen Terang Bangsa Semarang, kepada teman-teman Negeri 1 Bansari Temanggung, teman-teman SMK Pertanian Pembangunan Kanisius Ambarawa, dan juga teman-teman SMK Negeri 1 Ngablas. Sebelum melanjutkan kegiatan kita, izinkan saya memperkenalkan diri. Saya Michelle Angelina, mahasiswi dari Fakultas Pertanian dan Bisnis UKSW yang akan menjadi pemandu acara di siang hari ini. Untuk mengawali webinar ini, mari sama-sama kita bersatu di dalam doa. Saya akan pimpin dengan iman Kristiani. Bagi teman-teman yang memiliki kepercayaan lain, mohon mendukungnya dalam iman yang dipercayakan. Mari sama-sama kita bersatu dalam doa. Selamat siang Bapak, terima kasih atas segala berkat-Mu, tak pernah lelah kami bersyukur atas nafas yang telah Kau berikan. Pada siang hari ini kami diberi kesempatan berkumpul di webinar ini Tuhan, di dalam ruang virtual ini Bapak, kami sangat bersyukur. Terima kasih Tuhan, Kau yang memberkati setiap kami yang ada Tuhan, setiap kami yang terlibat Bapak, Kau yang memberkati Mr. John Tuhan, Kau yang memberkati Ibu Dina selaku moderator Bapak, dan juga teman-teman yang terlibat di belakang layar Bapak, biarlah segala rangkaian yang ada dalam webinar ini dapat berjalan dengan baik dari awal hingga akhirnya. Terima kasih Tuhan, Kau yang memberkati, Kau yang tutup bungkus setiap sarana-prasarana yang kami gunakan Tuhan. Kami mau tolak segala roh-roh jahat yang akan mengganggu webinar kami pada siang hari ini Tuhan. Terima kasih Bapak, terima kasih Yesus, kami siap memulai webinar ini dengan sukacita, dengan antusias, hanya di dalam nama Tuhan Yesus Kristus. Haleluya, amin. Puji Tuhan, teman-teman, selama kurang lebih 2 jam ke depan, kita akan bersama-sama dalam webinar ini yang akan terdiri dari beberapa rangkaian acara. Di antaranya, kita akan mendengarkan kata sambutan dari Dekan Fakultas Pertanian Universitas Kristen Satya Wacana, yang selanjutnya kita akan langsung memasuki acara inti, yaitu kita akan menyaksikan dan menerima ilmu yang spesial dan tentunya yang akan disampaikan oleh narasumber yang spesial juga, yaitu Mr. John Miller, PhD, yang merupakan Assistant Professor of Sustainability and Environmental Education, dan juga beliau merupakan Director of ACI from Gosen College. Dan juga kita akan nanti akan dipandu dengan moderator yang gak kalah spesial juga nih. Beliau merupakan dosen Fakultas Pertanian dan Bisnis UKSW. Beliau adalah Ibu Dina Ratuafi Banjarnaor, MSc. Kemudian teman-teman yang mungkin nantinya akan memiliki pertanyaan, akan dibuka sesi tanya jawab dengan pemateri dan juga akan dipandu oleh moderator yang kemudian akan ditutup dengan kesimpulan. Dan webinar ini akan kita akhiri dengan sesi penutup, foto bersama, dan juga doa penutup, maaf. Oke teman-teman, kita langsung saja akan memulai kegiatan webinar kita pada siang hari ini. Mungkin kita dalam rangkaian pertama, kita akan mendengarkan kata sambutan yang spesial dari Dekan Fakultas Pertanian Universitas Kristen Satya Wacana, yaitu Ibu Dr. Tinjung Mary Prisanti, SPMP. Kepada Ibu Tinjung, waktu dan tempat kami persilahkan.
Baik, terima kasih Michelle selaku MC. Selamat siang, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Good afternoon, Honorable Mr. John Miller and all participants. I'm Tinjung Mary Prisanti, Dean of Faculty of Agriculture and Business, Satya Wacana Christian University. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you today for virtual guest lecture of Faculty of Agriculture and Business. I'm proud to announce that this webinar is being conducted along with cooperation of Satya Wacana Christian University and Cousin College and MCC. And the theme of this webinar is about sustainable agriculture, I think. Yes, John. Yes, as we know, the sustainability of agriculture in Indonesia remains challenging. And the challenge is how to continue the agricultural development and economic growth that is needed to improve the quality of life and the basic need of the growing population, while at the same time we have to protect the environment. So we need to adjust our understanding and formulate action strategies for developing agricultural practice better and more sustainable in the future. The reason for the webinar is to increasing the student, all of us, our understanding to some strategies to develop sustainable agriculture, also to emphasize the significant involving all of us to make environmentally safe agriculture. So today with us, we have Mr. John Misler from Cousin College. I really appreciate and thank you for Mr. John Misler's willingness to be a speaker in this webinar. I ensure this webinar will be profitable and the next few hours will be fruitful for everyone here. Thank you again to the speaker. And also I would like to thank to the organizing committee for making this kind of academic activity possible. Thank you very much. I hope the lecture will accomplish all its aims. Once again, welcome and thank you very much for attending this event. Okay, back to MC. Silakan bisa.
Baik, terima kasih Bu Tunjung atas sambutannya. Mungkin teman-teman kita akan langsung aja nih ke acara inti. Mungkin teman-teman udah nungguin nih, aduh materinya kayak apa nih, penasaran nih. Jadi kita langsung akan memasuki sesi pemateri yang akan dipandu oleh dosen tercinta kita nih, yaitu Ibu Dina selaku moderator. Mungkin Ibu Dina bisa say hi dulu. Halo Ibu Dina. Oke, selamat pagi Bu. Mungkin langsung saja kepada Ibu Dina, waktu dan tempat kami persilakan.
Oke, terima kasih Michelle. Selamat pagi semuanya.
Pagi Bu.
Pagi Bu.
Pagi Bu. Pagi Bu.
Saya terdengar jelas kah?
Selamat pagi.
Jelas Bu.
Oke, kalau nanti suara saya putus-putus mohon diberitahu ya. Hello, good morning Mr. Misler. How are you?
Ini dibuka dulu dari mana? Yang dari WhatsApp.
Doing good, baik. Terima kasih.
Ini buka grup. Nah ini sudah punya download.
Itu suara dari mana?
Yuk. Ayo.
Pak Ye mungkin di unmute.
Oke, sudah ya. Maaf atas gangguannya. Mr. Misler, thank you so much for joining us today to share with us some of your knowledge, your ideas, and your thoughts about agroecology, about farming. It's a pleasure and honor for us. If you don't mind, I would love to introduce you first to the audience, but in Indonesian. Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Saya minta suara-suara yang selain dari Bapak John bisa di-mute.
Kelasnya kita ganti sebenarnya ini. Tapi kan nggak apa-apa kan, nggak salah. Kecuali kelas lu.
Oke, good then. Oke, selamat siang semuanya. Pertama-tama saya perkenalkan dulu pembicara kita hari ini. Tadi beliau tidak keberatan kalau saya perkenalkan dalam bahasa Indonesia. I will speak slowly, don't worry John. Yang pertama, Bapak John Misler ini adalah seorang profesor yang punya banyak pengalaman di bidang riset, di bidang proyek-proyek pertanian juga. Yang pertama, beliau itu sebenarnya aslinya belajar fisika dan geologi. Setelah itu lanjut mempelajari ilmu bumi. Setelah itu untuk proyek PhD-nya beliau itu mengkaji tentang ekologi dan biologi evolusi. Riset-riset beliau, publikasi beliau banyak berkaitan dengan topik-topik pertanian, SIG, Sistem Informasi Geografi. Saya rasa sebagian mahasiswa sudah mengambil juga mata kuliah SIG, berkaitan dengan remote sensing, berkaitan juga dengan agroekologi, dengan agroforestry di daerah tropis, berkaitan juga dengan aquatic ecosystem, contohnya seperti rawa pening yang ada di dekat kita. Sehingga pada hari ini, dengan semua kredensial beliau bisa menyampaikan topik tentang agroekologi untuk kita semua, yang mana fungsi agroekologi di sini adalah untuk mengurangi pencemaran air, untuk meningkatkan efisiensi penggunaan hara, serta meningkatkan kesehatan dan kebahagiaan manusia. I think this is an inspiring topic because, can I call you, should I call you Mr. Mishler or can I just call you John? I don't know.
John.
John will be fine? Okay, good then.
Mhm.
This is an inspiring topic actually, John. You know why? Because here we thought about agriculture in a more serious way for food production, but we rarely think about the health and happiness in agriculture. That's why your topic is really interesting, inspiring for us to give us some horizon. And I'm sure the students will be more than happy to listen to your speech today. So without any further delay, please welcome our guest speaker, Mr. John Mishler.
Hello, thank you. Terima kasih. Selamat siang, selamat pagi. I don't know.
Both you can use. Both you can interchange.
Maaf, my bahasa Indonesian is just a small amount. So I hope English is okay.
It is okay, of course.
I hope to learn more bahasa Indonesian in the future. So I will speak slowly because it can take some time to translate in everybody's mind. So I will try to speak slowly and clearly, but please let me know if I need to adjust my presentation, or if you have questions, you're free to just ask questions during the talk. I'm happy to have questions anytime. So I don't know, I'm going to see, do I have permission to share my screen? Okay, yes, it's working. Okay, so everyone should be seeing the title slide now. Everything okay? Okay, so I'll begin. So my central study area is agroecology and biogeochemistry. So what I mean by biogeochemistry is looking at carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, and understanding how these nutrients move across the landscape and they're central nutrients for life. So life requires nitrogen, phosphorus, and carbon. And today I'm going to speak specifically about nitrogen. So in some systems, nitrogen is very rare. So nitrogen is low, and so we can say that nitrogen is a limiting nutrient. A limiting nutrient means there's not enough nitrogen in the system. And so any way we can figure out to boost nitrogen amounts will increase productivity of the system. In other cases, we have too much nitrogen. So nitrogen can lead to unintended accidental environmental effects. So nitrogen in drinking water can be toxic to humans. Too much nitrogen in aquatic water environments can lead to eutrophication. So, and these ecological effects, so changes in ecology due to nitrogen use and nitrogen leaking into the system, can lead to unintended or accidental consequences for health and well-being. So today, I'm just with you for a short time, and I appreciate everyone who's taken time to come to this talk. So I appreciate it very much. Being a visitor here in Salatiga, I'm enjoying my time. And so I appreciate your attention and am sharing just a few things that I've learned while I've been here in Indonesia about some of these systems. So I'm going to mention a couple of studies. And so, for example, the study that I have on the screen now is from Java, and it's looking at nitrogen nitrate in drinking water. So, as we know, many people in the village rely on freshwater springs, right? Especially here in Salatiga, where there's water coming down from the mountains, and it comes back out as these freshwater springs. And villages use this water as a water supply. This study has shown that nitrogen can be quite high. So nitrates can be quite high in some of this drinking water. And so even after it's boiled, even after the water is boiled, it can have high amounts of nitrogen as nitrate present. And the problem with nitrate in drinking water is that our blood binds with oxygen. And that's how we bring oxygen into our bodies, right? We breathe in oxygen, and the oxygen connects to our red blood cells and moves throughout the body. So nitrate in water also will bind to our red blood cells. And so it will reduce our blood's ability to circulate oxygen around the body. And so it's especially dangerous for people who, so children, infants, small children, people who have a limited capacity to circulate oxygen. So this is one of the environmental effects, and this is a common problem all around the world. So I can tell you in the context in the United States, it's the same. We have farming systems where nitrogen is applied in the form of inorganic fertilizer. So that fertilizer is not completely used by the crop, and so rain may wash the fertilizer out into the surrounding environment, that the high nitrate water will then infiltrate, soak down into the ground, and contaminate groundwater, and it's brought back up through wells and can be a problem. So we have the same issue in the United States, and this issue is similar in many parts of the world. So this is one example where too much nitrogen can be a problem. Another situation that's common throughout the world involves parasites. So parasites, the small worms that will live inside the human body. One type of parasite is called a trematode. So that's one of our words that might be a little more complicated. It's a word used. It's a word used in technical conversations. So trematode is a type of parasitic worm, and they use many different organisms to complete their life cycle. So they have many different life stages. An egg hatches into a miracidium. That miracidium penetrates into a freshwater aquatic snail. And then the sporocyst grows into the cercaria. This is a photo here. And then those develop as adult worms. So this is the entire life cycle of one type of trematode that's here in Indonesia. So the egg will hatch in the water. The miracidia will penetrate the snail. The snail produces cercariae, and then these insist. So they form tight balls, and they will be present on vegetation. Normally, cattle, so sapi, kambing, they will eat the vegetation, and it will form an adult worm inside the animal, and then they will pass through the animal, through the feces, and if it gets into a water environment, then you have more eggs hatching. But if a human eats this plant that has the encysted metacercaria, the ball that it forms, then a human can also get this disease. It's most common in South America, because if you cook the plant, it will kill the parasite. So that's why it's recommended to cook any plants that might be harvested from areas that are sometimes covered in water and where there might be sapi or kambing. And so the reason why we're talking about trematodes when it comes to nutrients, trematodes and nitrogen, is because this stage, the aquatic snail, is the stage where if there are nutrients, if there's nitrogen flowing in to a freshwater system, to a stream, to a lake, then there will be more algae, more green algae that the snails eat. So more food for snails. The snails, there will be more snails, and each snail will produce more parasites. So this is another way where too much nitrogen into the environment can lead to effects on human health. So in another example, there are situations where not enough nitrogen is the problem. And so I spent some time on West Timor and Sumba in NTT region. And the dry season is quite long, right? The dry season is very long. And the cattle do not have many sources of good food, good forage. And so the cattle will need additional protein in order to be successful, to gain weight, to be able to reproduce and have calves. So in this situation, the soils are very low. They're limited in nitrogen, very low in nitrogen, very thin soils. And the grass, especially in the dry season, is very low in nitrogen, very low in protein. And so this is a situation where we need more nitrogen in the system. So this is on the other side, a low nitrogen system. We need more nitrogen in this system. And so I'm showing you a general diagram of the nitrogen cycle. So this is the very basic foundation of how nitrogen is cycling in the environment. And this is a simplified form. So this is a simple example, but we can learn some things about how nitrogen moves in the environment, so we can start to think about agroecological solutions to the problems that I've raised. So, for example, there are some ways to get nitrogen into this system. So if we think about how do we get nitrogen into the soil? So one way is through legumes. Legumes like beans are able to, there are root nodules. So these plants form small nodules, small balls on the roots, and they create environments for bacteria that are able to take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and put it into a form that's usable for other plants. So our atmosphere is full of nitrogen. There's nitrogen everywhere, nitrogen, nitrogen, nitrogen. But it's in the form of dinitrogen, N2, and organisms, plants cannot use N2. But these legumes, because they've formed these root nodules, they are able, the bacteria, the nitrogen fixing bacteria, are able to take nitrogen from the atmosphere, N2, and convert it into nitrogen that's usable for plants. So legumes are one of these ways that we get nitrogen from the atmosphere into the soil. Then another pathway is decomposition. decomposition. So a plant cannot use dead leaves. It's not useful. So a plant cannot use dead leaves as nutrients, as a source of nitrogen to grow. But there are organisms that can break down dead leaves, pieces of wood, all these, manures. So there are organisms who can break this material down and convert it into a form that plants can use. So these are the decomposers. There are bacteria, there are fungi, and there are a lot of organisms, soil ecology. There are a lot of organisms involved in this process in taking a leaf and breaking it down into nutrients that can be used by plants. So that's a second way that we can get nitrogen available in the soils. And then a third way is just directly applying fertilizer. So there's synthetic fertilizer, right? That's commonly used in many farming systems. This synthetic fertilizer that you can just apply. Or some people use animal manure. So part of animal manure needs to be broken down, but another part of it is ready to use. So when using animal manure, there's a part that can be used by plants right away, but another part needs to be worked on by decomposers first. So once we have nitrogen in the soil, there are also nitrogen fixing bacteria that just live in the soil. So some nitrogen fixing bacteria live with plants, others just live free in the soil. So once nitrogen is in the soil, whether it's through decomposition or nitrogen fixing bacteria or direct application of fertilizer or manure, animal manure, then there are other processes in the soil that make nitrogen more or less available. So not all nitrogen is equally available for plant growth. So ammonium, NH4+, is easy for plants to take up, and it is positively charged, which means that it will stay in the soil. It stays connected to the soil because soils tend to be negatively charged. So ammonium will stay in the soil, but you have other organisms, other microbes that nitrify ammonium, nitrification, which leads to nitrites and then nitrates. So nitrates are negatively charged. They're also able to be taken up by plants. So plants can take up ammonium and plants can take up nitrate. But nitrate is much more likely to be washed out of the system. So this is where we start getting those negative environmental effects of nitrogen. So, if we're talking about nitrogen in drinking water, or nitrogen in groundwater, or nitrogen entering streams and causing causing snails to increase and causing an increase in parasites, both of those tend to be caused by nitrates flowing from our farming systems into other systems that we don't want them to be in. And then a way for nitrogen to be lost from the system is denitrification. So bacteria will convert nitrates into either nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas, N2O, or also it gets converted into dinitrogen again. So that's ways the nitrogen can leave the system. So one more way that nitrogen can leave the system is through fire, API. So fire, when it burns plant material, nitrogen is lost to the atmosphere. So in places where people burn frequently, they are actually reducing the nitrogen in the environment, and that nitrogen has to be replaced somehow. So just a side note that when we burn, the nitrogen in the material that's being burned will go up into the atmosphere. So this is a very basic diagram of the nitrogen cycle, so we can understand a little bit about what we're talking about here. And I've also included some key terms here. So these were terms that we visited while we were looking at the diagram. And I will just leave them here. They are available if you need to go back for definitions. And so sometimes it can be difficult to understand nitrogen fixation by bacteria, especially on root nodules. So here is a photo of legume roots, and you can see the nodules that hold the bacteria. Here's a microscope photo. Again, you can see these nodules housing the bacteria. And here is a diagram. We will not be concerned with looking at the diagram in detail. And as a special note, here in Java, I don't know if this is a new system for me, is understanding nutrient cycling in rice paddies. So if I go out into the sawa fields, these systems have an additional factor in that they're flooded. So because they are flooded, you can actually have some different interactions. So when soils are flooded, there is no oxygen, or there's very little oxygen present in the soil. And so because there's very little oxygen present in the soil, you have additional interactions that aren't present with soils that have a lot of oxygen. So I wanted to just mention, so this is basically the same diagram that I showed you earlier, except now we are including specifically for flooded rice paddy soils, the Animox reactions, which are a way to combine ammonium and nitrite and complete the transition from ammonium to dinitrogen in the presence or in the lack of oxygen in the soil. So this is an additional thing to think about when thinking about the common systems we see around us in the sawa fields. And it gets even more complicated. So again, I will not, we're just scratching the surface today. We're doing just a very little amount of amount of discussion on this conversation. But if you include phosphorus and carbon, then rice cultivation gets even more complicated, because then you start looking at things like methane, which methane is another greenhouse gas. So methane is a greenhouse gas. Nitrous oxide is a greenhouse gas. So you start to have these interactions occurring, and there are a lot more soil interactions. So I just wanted to provide this diagram to tell you that there's so much more when considering soil chemistry in even just rice systems. And of course, so we mentioned that it's common to have fertilizer, right, in these rice systems. And so just to keep in mind that the amount of fertilizer applied and how it's applied can have large effects on some of these environmental issues that we talked about. So high nitrate in groundwater, or parasitic diseases, because in fact, there are a lot of diseases that do come from rice paddies, you know, when there's additional nitrogen being applied. So now that we've covered some general information that will help us understand what we're talking about, and we've talked a little bit about rice paddy environments, and that you can have nitrate leaching, nitrate escaping from rice paddies, leading to high nitrates in groundwater, leading to high nitrates in surface water, in rivers and streams, and this can have direct effects on human health. So now I'm changing to a different system. So this is a system that I just began to learn about just 2 weeks ago. And so when I visited West Timor and Sumba, so this is my family. This one is me. This is my wife, Ibu Ruth. This is my oldest, my son, Tobias, my daughter, Clarabelle, and my youngest son, Elwin. So this photo demonstrates, you know, some of the common systems in these islands where you have woodland, but you also have these grassland areas, these grassland patches that are used as grazing land. And so we're going to talk a little bit about sapi and kambing in these systems. So here I am with Prof. Fred from Undana, and in the background, it might be a little difficult to see, but you can see erosion. So you can see these slopes are quite steep, and you can see erosion of the soil. And so when you are losing soil from areas that already have very thin soils, it takes a very long time to build these soils back, because there's not much organic matter in the system. So at Undana, we visited the campus farm, and you can see this is a leguminous tree, Lam Toro, and this is used as food for cattle. as fodder for cattle, because as we mentioned before, the grass on these islands, especially during the dry season, is very dry, very low in protein, and the cattle, so sapi have a difficult time being able to get enough nitrogen, get enough protein. And so having a tree, right, a tree that is a legume, so these are legumes, so they are getting their nitrogen from the atmosphere. They're able to pull nitrogen from the atmosphere into the soils, into their tissue, into the system, and ultimately into the cattle. So trees like this that have deep roots are able to survive the dry season and provide protein-rich food for sapi, even when there is very little nitrogen in the system aside from them. So this is one example of the system on West Timor. So the cattle in this case are tied to the feeding area, and they will cut lamb toro and bring it to the sapi. So in this system, the sapi are using very little energy because they are not grazing, they're not moving during the day, and they are being brought high protein food because they're being fed these legumes. So there are other, in addition to these trees, lamb toro, there are other types of legumes, nitrogen fixing plants that can be used as food for sapi during the dry season. So, and with some of these other legumes, you can intercrop. So you crop them with maize. And so the legume is able to benefit the maize, but also able to be harvested and provided to the sapi, or you can just let sapi roam amongst the maize field after harvest. So this is another example of intercropping with maize. Here's the legume. Or after the rice harvest, when you're in the dry season, there's still enough moisture to grow the legume within the rice paddy. And so it provides additional high protein, high nitrogen food for sapi. And this is an example showing, here's the maize that's grown with the legume. And if you leave some of the legume in with the maize, the maize can use it as a nitrogen source versus maize that did not have the nitrogen from the legume. So let me summarize what we've been talking about today. So there are effects that nitrogen can have on human health and wellness. Nitrogen can be in excess. So when you have too much nitrogen in the system, so let's say you're using a lot of fertilizers in the sawa fields, and that nitrogen can be converted to nitrate, and it can leave the system, right? And when it leaves the system, it can cause effects that can be that can impact human health. So when it comes to nitrogen leaving the system as nitrate, we talked about, for example, the drinking water and the parasitic disease. So when we are in our farming systems, we want to avoid having nitrogen leave our system for a couple reasons. One is that we don't want those negative downstream impacts, right? We don't want dangerous drinking water. We don't want to increase disease. And so we have to think carefully about how we use nitrogen in the sawa fields. Because if we over apply, we're not only one, increasing the risk of those downstream effects, but two, we're also wasting money on fertilizer that's just leaving the system. And there are different solutions to addressing this. So being very careful about how much nutrients are being applied, that's one way to approach it. Another way is there are also rice varieties where the nitrogen use efficiency is better than others. So there are some rice varieties that require less fertilizer. And so these rice varieties, if we plant these improved varieties, there's less fertilizer needed in the system and less of a chance to have these negative downstream effects. And a third way to address this is to create some kind of filtering wetland that will take up the excess nitrogen, the extra nitrogen leaving the paddy system before it reaches the larger environment. So there are ways, even if our water does have too much nitrogen in it from over application, we can catch it. And then one more way to address over application of nitrogen in the rice paddy systems is to use more organic fertilizer. So things like manures mixed with plant material. And these sources of nitrogen, they tend to release slowly over time. So synthetic fertilizer releases everything at once, whereas these organic fertilizers provide lower amounts of nutrients, but steady over time. And so coming up with a combination of these solutions can start to address nitrogen pollution in streams and in groundwater. And then on the other side, when we were talking about these grazing systems, we are using the ecological tools that we have access to. So we have these legumes, these plants that we can use. We can plant them, we can use them to hold nitrogen from the atmosphere and turn them into a nutritious feed for sapi that can help the sapi and the camping, help them get through the dry season. And so that is another aspect of agroecology, this idea that we can use the natural abilities of the plants and animals around us in order to achieve environmental health and agricultural production. So I just wanted to share, a couple, maybe two examples that I've observed while I've been here in Indonesia. I've enjoyed my time in Indonesia very much. I'm very happy to be here in Salatiga, and I'm very happy to have been invited to speak with you today. So terima kasih, and I'm prepared for questions whenever we want to proceed with the program.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. Bagaimana dengan audience? Ada yang mau didiskusikan dengan beliau? Atau mungkin saya ini aja ya, siapa tahu ada yang missing. I'm sorry, John, I speak Indonesian. At this moment, I'm just going to tell some summaries, but just brief. Pada dasarnya yang dibahas Bapak John adalah bahwa ketika kita mengkaji nitrogen di ekosistem pertanian, kalau kita menggunakan terlalu banyak nitrogen, maka ada efek negatifnya. Apabila terjadi proses seperti pencucian nitrate leaching, itu mungkin sebagian besar sudah belajar di dasar ilmu tanah dan di mata kuliah KKT, di mana nitrate akan masuk ke dalam air tanah, kemudian air tanah digunakan nanti sebagai sumber air minum. Padahal nitrat itu sendiri, kalau sudah masuk di badan kita, dia akan menghambat sirkulasi oksigen di dalam tubuh. Jadi terlalu banyak nitrogen di ekosistem pertanian juga tidak baik, karena mencemari drinking water, air minum, dan bisa memicu pertumbuhan populasi parasit trematoda. Parasit trematoda yang salah satunya disebarkan oleh bekicot, snails. Tetapi kalau nitrogen terlalu kurang juga bisa mengakibatkan produksi daging, misalnya pada sapi atau kambing, itu proteinnya rendah ataupun protein pada susunya rendah. Padahal protein itu kan salah satu building blocks, salah satu nutrien yang dibutuhkan untuk pembentukan muscle, otot, dan juga untuk membentuk kecerdasan manusia. Jadi terlalu banyak nitrogen juga repot, terlalu sedikit juga repot. Jadi kaitannya itu lebih ke arah health, human health, kepada kebahagiaan kita sebagai manusia, kesejahteraan kita. Sehingga yang disarankan adalah beberapa konsep agroekologi seperti menanam legum untuk menambahkan nitrogen ke dalam tanah, kemudian mengkombinasikan pupuk N organik dengan pupuk N anorganik atau sintetik, atau juga bisa dengan cara menggunakan varietas-varietas tertentu yang lebih efisien dalam menyerap hara nitrogen. Nah, kira-kira itu ya summary-nya in brief. Kalau ada yang mau didiskusikan dengan Bapak John, you can, for the audience, if you want to ask something to Bapak John, please, you can ask in Indonesian, and I will translate your question. And if you want to speak in English too, it's okay. Anyone? Or you can write your questions in the chat column for the audience. Sambil menunggu pertanyaan dari audience, saya juga mau tanya. Can I ask you something, John? Because you said that snails are the intermediate host for the parasite. What about slugs? Is it similar to slugs? Slug, S-L-U-G.
Yes, it's a very good question. They are just snails with no clothes.
Yeah, a lot here. You can find them a lot here, to be honest, especially in rain season.
Yeah. So they can be pests for crops, but they don't carry the parasites. And also, you know, the land snails, the snails you find on land, they are also not carrying the parasites. It's only snails that live in water.
Okay. So can we say that eating vegetables that are invaded by slugs is totally fine?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay. Yeah, there is an audience, Ibu Ari Handriatni. She wants to ask a question or to discuss something. Please, Ibu.
Terima kasih, Bu Dina. Saya akan menyampaikan pertanyaan dalam bahasa Indonesia ya. Biasanya para petani itu memberikan pupuk urea itu sangat berlebihan di sawah, sehingga menyebabkan tanaman padi itu tumbuh subur, hijau, tetapi ada kelemahannya yaitu sukulen, sehingga petani itu senang sekali memberikan urea berlebihan, nanti tanaman padinya itu hijau, anakannya banyak sekali, tetapi mudah patah. Nah, ini bagaimana solusinya?
Oh,
Begitu Bu Dina.
oh ya, berarti ini ya Bu, teknis ya, hal teknis, padi diberikan banyak pupuk urea, tetapi malah patah.
Ya, karena petani kan senangnya memberikan pupuk urea berlebihan ya. Nah, itu petani senang seperti itu karena menyebabkan tanaman padinya itu anakannya banyak, kemudian hijau. Nah, tetapi mudah patah setelah itu karena sukulen kan. Jadi urea itu masuk ke dalam tubuh tanaman padi secara berlebihan, menyebabkan tanaman itu sukulen, berair sehingga mudah patah. Jadi petani itu senangnya secara performan wow gitu dulu, padahal setelah itu patah gitu.
Iya. Saya coba tanyakan ya Ibu, saya coba translate walaupun ini kaitannya ke arah pengelolaan hara ya jadinya ya. John, there is one question here from Ibu Ari. She said that she found many farmers here applied excessive urea into the paddy rice fields, but then they found that the stems break easily after that. Do you have any suggestion based on your experience so far? I know this is a nutrient management related topic, but perhaps if you have some insights about it.
Urea itu kandungannya N ya Mbak?
Ya.
Urea itu kandungannya N ya?
Iya.
Oke.
Yes, we have a similar problem in the United States, especially with wheat. So when there's excessive fertilizer applied to wheat, the stems become weak and they fall over to the ground and they're flat. If I can ask a follow-up before answering, do we know why they are applying excess urea?
Oke, Ibu, sebelum Bapaknya menjawab, Bapaknya mau bertanya.
Iya ya.
Apakah, maaf, pertanyaannya kenapa petaninya memberikan pemupukan berlebihan? Bapaknya pengen tahu dulu.
Karena efeknya ya, tanaman padi itu menjadi anakannya banyak, kemudian hijau banget gitu. Jadi petani itu, the farmer ya, senang banget dengan kondisi seperti itu. Tetapi setelah itu pada patah gitu.
Okay. So John, basically the farmers apply a lot of fertilizer because they expect the crops to be green, much greener actually, larger, but then they found out that the stems fell down because of the expectation, that's all.
Yes. So yes, it is a similar problem, I think, everywhere, everywhere in the world. Because I think we all know, right? We all know that farming can be very risky. Because when you're farming, you have just this one chance, or maybe two chances in a year to get a yield, to get to produce food. And so farmers across the world, if they have access to fertilizer and the fertilizer is affordable, then they will over apply. They will apply too much because, yeah, exactly how you stated it. They would rather apply too much than apply not enough and have the crop fail. So we struggle with the same thing in the United States. And we've started to this idea precision agriculture, where we are measuring the amount of nitrogen in the soil as we apply. So we calculate the correct amount. And so I know that in some areas of China, in the paddy fields, sawa fields, they are starting to apply some of this precision agriculture. And so it really is a question of knowing how much nitrogen is in the soil currently. So then knowing how much nitrogen to apply. And yes, it's the reason the stalks fall over is because the stalk needs a balance of carbon. So carbon is what is what's holding that the stalk. It's the strong part of the stalk, and then nitrogen is the protein. So that is what is filling the rice. Yeah. And so when the stalk is not strong, it's the same when it's wheat and when it's rice. When the stalk is taking too much nitrogen and the carbon is not keeping up, then you'll have what we call lodging. It's falling over. So yeah, I think this is a common issue, and as long as fertilizer is affordable, I think farmers will continue to over apply. So and I understand why, because it's risky, right? And so farmers are trying to avoid a crop failure. And so it can be difficult to calculate and apply just the right amount of nitrogen.
Yeah. Ibu?
Iya, Bu Dina.
Kira-kira begitu penjelasan, apa perlu diterjemahkan lagi?
Jadi memberikan pengertian ke petani melalui penyuluhan itu supaya tepat dosis, tepat sasaran, tepat waktu, tepat macamnya pupuk itu memang itu habit ya, jadi susah dirubah gitu Bu maksudnya. Jadi petani itu ya senangnya memberikan pupuk N dalam bentuk urea itu berlebihan itu tadi.
Iya.
Ya, cukup Bu.
Iya Bu. Jadi intinya kembali lagi ke pemupukan berbasis rekomendasi, berbasis ini ya.
Iya.
Problemnya petaninya ya, karena sudah kebiasaan ya.
Iya. Dan lewat penyuluhan itu sudah ya, tetapi mungkin ya itu karena habit berubahnya itu how to make difference itu susah.
She just said that she agrees with that, with the idea of applying fertilizer based on a recommendation. But also the problem here is mainly about the farmers that are risk averse. So it's already a habit for the farmers, so they wouldn't change abruptly. So no.
I agree.
About it?
Yeah. Sama in United States.
Ya. Jadi peristiwanya sama di Amerika, Ibu.
Oh iya.
Peristiwanya sama di Amerika Serikat.
Oh gitu ya. Iya.
Iya.
Cukup Bu Dina.
Okay, then shall we move to the next question from, let me see, also in Indonesian, from Ibu Nanik Furaida. Ibu Nanik is from Islamic University of Jember. Let me read the question first, John. What about the excess nitrogen on vegetables? Because there is nitrate reductase, which affects the stem, the vegetable stem. And what are the effects on human health? That's the question from Ibu Nanik.
And so if I understand the question correctly, it's asking if excess nitrogen is applied to vegetables,
Yeah.
are there negative health effects in consuming these vegetables?
I think
Is
so.
that, yeah, so
But also she wants to know about the effect of the nitrate reductase on the vegetable itself.
Yeah, so the biggest impact of the nitrogen reductase on the vegetable is that it takes energy to decrease the, to deal with the extra nitrogen. And so at some point, you must, the balance has to be, the imbalance has to be quite large. If vegetables are having to deal with the large amounts of nitrogen that from over application, then you can actually reduce productivity if nitrogen is in excess. But the biggest impact of too much nitrogen on vegetables, and I see that someone, Johannes in the chat mentioned it, that when you start increasing nitrogen in vegetables, they actually start to attract more pests. And so your vegetables might look very green, but they're also going to be less resistant to pests and pest damage, because the nitrogen creates a very rich diet, and so the pests are attracted to that, and you're also diluting the natural chemicals in the plants that repel the pests. So yes, excess nitrogen can be a problem for plant growth, but the main effect of excess nitrogen on plant growth is through, especially with vegetables, is through decreasing resistance to insect damage and sometimes fungal damage.
Oke, thank you. Ibu Nani, begitu jawaban dari Pak John, bahwa mungkin lebih banyak efeknya itu untuk tanaman itu sendiri menarik hama. Ibu? Ya? Ada ini lagi, Bu? Ada suara? Please, Ibu, audionya Ibu. Audionya Ibu masih mute. Ibu Nani.
Ya, halo.
Ya. Begitu respon beliau.
Terima kasih. Jadi semakin tinggi kandungan nitrogen di dalam sayuran, itu akan meningkatkan daya tarik hama penyakit seperti itu, Bu Dina.
Iya, di lahan sayurannya. Semakin banyak nitrogen berlebih di lahan sayurannya, yang tertarik itu justru hama dan penyakit. Mungkin salah satunya mungkin amonium ya, terlalu banyak amonium.
Ya kan, untuk tanaman sayuran itu kan rata-rata umurnya semusim, kemudian dipanen pada fase vegetatif. Jadi petani kan memang dominan memberikan pupuk urea, karena memang pupuk urea itu unsur N cenderung dipakai untuk membentuk inti klorofil selain magnesium. Jadi intinya bagaimana biar balance gitu, Bu Dina. Rekomendasinya itu untuk tanaman. Kan kadang demand dari konsumen itu kan menghendaki sayuran tuh yang mulus gitu ya. Daunnya hijau gitu, padahal dengan mulus dan daunnya yang semakin hijau itu kandungan pemupukan N-nya itu kan semakin tinggi seperti ini ya. Gimana cara?
John, this is an intriguing question that she has asked, because she said that consumers usually want green vegetables, green and let's say flawless, flawless vegetable. So in order to achieve such products, then farmers need to apply more vegetables during the vegetative stage of the vegetables. So she said that how do they deal with that then? How do they keep the balance between maintaining the area free from excess nitrogen, but also they can produce good vegetables, good, as I said before, flawless and green?
Yes, it's a very good question. And the problem is not with the farmer, but the consumer. So it's the same in America, where the fruit or the vegetable must be flawless, must look very nice, and no spots, nothing, perfect color. And in America also, I don't know if it's the same in Indonesia, but in America, we like them to be very big. So a pepper can be very big, for example. And so this creates some problems. And again, it's from the consumer side. So number one, if consumers only accept the flawless, perfect, no spots, then it creates a lot of waste. Because farmers are producing everything, and maybe there's a little spot, or maybe the carrot is a little crooked. But it's okay. And the second problem is something called nutrient dilution. So in America, so I can explain nutrient dilution. In America, because we want big vegetables, that means the vegetables are increasing in starch content. So a lot more starch, and the bigger the amount of starch, the less nutrient, like vitamins, minerals, essential vitamins, the smaller the concentration of vitamins in the flesh of the vegetable. So the vegetables in America, even though they're getting bigger, they're getting less nutritious. And it's almost like a pepper gives you the same nutrition as nasi, because the starch content is increasing. So it will make you feel full, but it will not provide the vitamins required. And so it's true that the farmers are responding to this pressure by the consumer for perfect, flawless vegetables. Some of it is the green color. And so absolutely correct that if you increase nitrogen, you increase chlorophyll. And so you increase this nice green color. And then part of it is spots, blemishes, insect damage. And so one solution in the US, and I've seen people use this. Well, I don't know that I've seen it yet, is that we have covers. It's a cloth cover. We call it row cover. And so we cover the vegetables. Light and air can still move freely, but insects cannot. And so if we don't want to use pesticide, we will use those covers as a barrier for insects. So that will address the spots. Now, the greenness can be more difficult because a plant, sometimes that the greenness of the plant is too much. It's not natural, because you still want those chemicals that plants produce are actually good for nutrition. So I think part of it, there are some solutions that farmers can use. They can also use, and I don't know if it's upuk, like organic fertilizer.
Pupuk kandang? Manure, you mean?
Yeah.
The cattle
Yeah.
manure?
So the mixture of manure and plants, the farmers are using, that's a really good slow release fertilizer that builds fertility at the vegetables. So that, is better than using the fast release synthetic fertilizer. But it's also a consumer education issue. So yeah, it's complicated, but it's very true. And again, in America, it's similar. So we are trying very hard to educate consumers about what is good for us.
Oke. Jadi Ibu Nani,
Ya.
Panjang lebar jawaban beliau.
Ya.
Artinya di Amerika juga hal yang sama terjadi. Salah satu caranya adalah mengedukasi konsumen bahwa ini loh sayur yang bagus itu tidak selalu yang
mulus.
Tidak selalu yang kalau yang hijau ya karena klorofil ya. Tapi tidak selalu harus yang tanpa bekas gigitan hama. Satu itu mengedukasi konsumen. Lalu yang kedua kata beliau kalau di Amerika itu akhirnya salah satu solusinya mereka kalau nanam sayur kasih cover yang bisa cahaya tetap masuk tetapi insek tidak bisa masuk, serangga tidak bisa masuk. Itu salah satu.
Paranet gitu ya Bu Dina.
Ya mirip paranet. Tapi jangan paranet yang terlalu gelap juga karena nanti tidak dapat cahaya yang cukup. Gitu ya Bu?
Terima kasih.
Next question from Ibu Marina. It's in English. Perhaps have you seen it in the chat column? Yeah, it's in English. Please just go ahead.
Yes, Ibu Marina. It's a good question. I think it can be a combination. So the synthetic nitrogen is good for a very fast, immediate amount of nitrogen. But we don't want a situation where the nitrogen we apply goes to the plant and then the extra flows out of the system. We want to apply just enough so that the nitrogen, the synthetic nitrogen that we use, is mainly used by the plant. And so a way to keep nitrogen, the synthetic nitrogen, from leaving is also to have a solid layer of organic material. And so that's where the manure mixed with the plant material, all of that building a very rich layer of organic matter is also important. So I think it's a combination. We can use small amounts of synthetic nitrogen and it's okay. We can use it when we need it. But having that organic matter, the slow release nitrogen in the soil, it's supporting the majority of our plants' nutrition is a really good foundation. And the other factor is cost. So it is very dependent on the cost of synthetic fertilizer, because the farmer might sell more vegetables, but if the cost of production is much more because of the cost of the inorganic fertilizer, then the farmer's not made a profit. And so I think that is another factor. Terima kasih.
Okay, Ibu Marina.
Thank you, Mr. John. But I want to know how big combination, 50-50 or 60-40?
Yes, it's an excellent question, and I think it really depends on the specific farm, the specific system, because some soil, all the soils are different than others, and the crops, so it can depend on the type of crop. So if you're growing cucumbers or if you're growing garlic, it's very different. So yeah, I think it's always about a specific crop, and even so some of the root crops, so like radish, it does not like nitrogen. If you have too much nitrogen, the root crop will produce a lot of green leaves, but the root in the soil will be very small. So yes, it's an excellent question, and it is completely depends on the type of system that you're working in.
Begitu Bu Marina?
Okay.
Pada sistem pertanaman yang dipilih.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. John. Very interesting your explain. Thank you, Bu Dina.
Okay.
Terima kasih, Ibu.
Sama-sama. You're welcome.
Let me ask the committee first. How much time do we have? How much time do we have? Can I ask? Because we started late and I don't know how much time left now.
Ibu, jika melihat dari jadwal sekitar 2-3 menit lagi, Bu.
Okay. 2 to 3 minutes more, John. I think 1 or 2 questions should be enough, right? Okay, let's move to the question of Bapak Yoga. Bapak Yoga Handoko. It's in English again. I think you can read it in the column chat. In the chat column, I mean.
Okay. Yeah, okay, thank you, Ms. Dina. Okay, John, I think it's the topic our lecture this morning is very interesting. Thank you so much, John. Okay, John, do you have a plan to research the accumulation of nitrogens and nitrates in agricultural lands around Salatiga or Central Java, John? Because I think the basic research is very important and good for evaluating agriculture and animal husbandry systems, and also as a starting point for our collaboration with the lecture staff of our faculty, Satya Wacana. Thank you.
Yes, terima kasih, Pak. I think probably the easiest beginning for a project would be sampling well water, so sampling groundwater, because it can be sampled from sources, and so that will at least tell us if there's a lot of excess nitrogen in the groundwater. So I've been very busy with our program, and so regretfully I have not been able to manage to do any research while I'm here, but I do hope to return to continue research. So it would be good to maintain and continue to develop the collaboration. So I can say that I have some ideas, but I've not had a moment to really think about it. So I appreciate you bringing up the question. Terima kasih.
Okay, we will read your next plan, John. Thank you.
Ya, mungkin next time ya Pak Yoga. Atau bisa kolaborasi dulu dengan yang lain untuk itu tadi, untuk starting point-nya mendeteksi kandungan nitrat di tiap-tiap air sumur, well water or groundwater, atau air tanah. Mungkin dimulai dengan itu, tahun depan dilanjutkan dengan Bapak John. Okay, I think that should be enough for now. No more questions, and Thank you so much, John, for sharing with us your research, your knowledge, your insights, your ideas. I hope you have a good time in Salatiga, in Indonesia, because it's a warm, tropical country. Can you survive so far with the warmth?
Yes, the warmth does not bother me.
Okay.
But I have noticed that I sweat more than any Indonesian. So
Yeah.
I think people can tell that maybe my body is not as used to the Indonesian climate.
Yeah. And so that's why I wish you a good time here. Selanjutnya
Yes.
saya
And I just want to say thank you for Satya Wacana for the invitation. It's an honor to be invited and for everyone here to be attending and asking questions. It's an honor, and I thank you for your time.
Ya, oke. Selanjutnya saya kembalikan kepada MC, and to you, John. Have a good day. See you next time. MC, please.
Baik, Ibu, terima kasih. Okay, thank you to Mr. Michel for the knowledge that is provided for all of us, and Mrs. Dina who has guided. Nah, sekarang kita akan memberikan sebuah penghargaan untuk Mrs. Michel dan juga Ibu Dina yang sudah terlibat. Mungkin mohon ditampilkan sebuah sertifikat. Oke, yang pertama kita sebuah penghargaan kami dengan penuh sukacita kami akan memberikan sertifikat kepada Mr. John Michel PhD sebagai pembicara pada webinar hari ini. Mungkin akan diambil foto ya sebentar. 1, 2, 3. Oke, selanjutnya tidak lupa juga
Michelle.
Ya.
Maaf ya, sebentar tak terjemahkan dulu untuk beliau.
Oh iya Bu, silakan Ibu.
John?
Yes.
The certificate is for you, she said. Will be given to you as our appreciation for your presence, here, for your time, for your discussion today.
Yes, I appreciate it, and I'll be in Salatiga until April 20th.
Okay.
So maybe you'll see me around.
Okay, cool. Silakan Michelle.
Baik, terima kasih Bu Dina. Selanjutnya, tidak lupa juga kami akan memberikan penghargaan untuk Bu Dina Rotovi Banjarnegara MSC selaku moderator yang sudah memandu pemateri pada siang hari ini. Kita akan mengambil foto 1, 2, 3. Oke.
Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Bu. Dan untuk teman-teman peserta, kami akan memberikan link presensi di kolom chat. Mungkin teman-teman bisa langsung mengisinya saja. Dalam presensi tersebut sudah dicantumkan apa yang harus diisi, kemudian ada panduan jika teman-teman adalah mahasiswa ataupun ibu bapak dosen. Nah, berikut sudah saya lampirkan dalam kolom chat. Nah, puji Tuhan, kita sudah memasuki di penghujung acara. Saya mewakili pihak yang bertugas pada webinar ini mengucapkan banyak-banyak terima kasih kepada seluruh peserta webinar yang telah hadir, baik yang ada dalam ruang Zoom ataupun ada di live streaming YouTube. Dan saya juga mengucapkan mohon maaf sebesar-besarnya atas segala kendala ataupun kesalahan yang pihak kami lakukan, mungkin akan menjadi bekal dan akan menjadi perbaikan untuk acara webinar selanjutnya. Nah, sebelum kita berpisah satu dengan yang lain, saya mengajak Bapak, Ibu, teman-teman semuanya untuk menyalakan kamera karena saat ini kita akan melakukan sesi dokumentasi. Oke, mungkin saya beri waktu 5-10 detik untuk mempersiapkan diri. Mungkin ada yang mau rapihin rambut, rapihin baju dulu. Yuk teman-teman, kita on-cam.
We'll be taking picture. No, I'm just saying that to John. We'll be taking picture. So be ready on cam.
Oke, ada 7 slide. Oke, yang pertama, 3, 2, 1, cheese. Oke, slide kedua. Sebentar, ada ya mas, ada chat. Oke, dan slide kedua, 3, 2, 1, cheese. Oke, yang ketiga, 3, 2, 1, cheese. Oke, yang keempat, mungkin teman-teman yang belum on cam bisa ya. 3, 2, 1, cheese. Yang kelima, 3, 2, 1, cheese. Yang keenam, 3, 2, 1, cheese. Dan yang terakhir, 1, 2, cheese. Oke. Terima kasih teman-teman yang sudah on cam. Nah, untuk menutup webinar kita pada siang hari ini, kita akan menutupnya bersama-sama kembali bersatu di dalam doa. Akan saya pimpin dengan iman Kristiani bagi teman-teman lain yang memiliki kepercayaan lain dapat mendukungnya dalam iman kepercayaannya. Mari sama-sama kita berdoa. Terima kasih Tuhan, terima kasih Yesus atas segala berkat-Mu sepanjang webinar ini dari awal hingga akhirnya. Terima kasih untuk penyertaan-Mu Bapak, biarlah Engkau memberkati setiap kami, Engkau memberkati Mr. Mihler juga Ibu Dina yang sudah terlibat Bapak, Engkau yang memberkati lebih lagi setiap hal yang sedang dilakukannya, kami percaya Engkau telah buat berhasil. Setiap kami Tuhan yang mengikuti webinar ini, biarlah setiap ilmu yang kami terima dapat kami terapkan jadi bekal yang indah untuk kedepannya. Terima kasih Bapak, puji syukur hanya kami berikan kepadamu, hanya dalam nama Tuhan Yesus kami berdoa, haleluya, amin. Oke, saya Miss Angelina selaku pembawa acara hari ini pamit undur diri, juga mewakili teman-teman yang bertugas di balik layar. Sekali lagi mengucapkan terima kasih dan mohon maaf apabila ada perkataan dan tindakan yang kurang berkenan. Sampai jumpa di webinar selanjutnya, di kuliah tamu selanjutnya. Tetap jaga kesehatan, Tuhan Yesus memberkati. Thank you,
Terima kasih. Thank you, John.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Oke.
Terima
Thank you,
kasih
John.
Bu
Have a good
Ari,
day.
Ibu, Bapak yang hadir, juga teman-teman semua. Terima kasih panitia, Mas Andre, untuk semuanya. Oke. Terima kasih, Miss Stefani. Baru kenal kita ya, baru jumpa di sini ya. Oke.
Ya, mari Ibu semua.
Baik, terima kasih. Mohon izin.